Welcome to another Howard's Orchid video. Today I'm going to swing the camera around gently so that I can film over in this corner of the greenhouse. This is next to an east-facing window, and I brought you over here because on the shelf down here I've got a lot of small miniature cool-growing plants. They're positioned here because they get quite good light, although in the summer the end wall is shaded. And they're farthest away from the main source of heat, which is over in that part of the greenhouse. And on this shelf here, they keep relatively cool. So I've got a lot of orchids that would naturally grow at really high altitudes, where they're cool and moist all the time. So let me show you a couple of miniature orchids that I haven't shown you before. One I've only had since last year, and another one I've had for many years. This is Restrepia, and I'm going to have to say this carefully, nittiorhyncha. Yes, that's right. I've got about 10 different Restrepias because they're really delightful little orchids that only need quite cool conditions. And this one was quite different from all the others that I've come across because it has these beautiful little sort of cup-shaped blooms. Now, Restrepias, as I said, come from quite high altitudes. I've got this growing in a clear plastic pot so that I can see what's going on. You can just about see root growing there. The problem with this particular size plastic pot is you can't get them in really clear plastic that comes in this sort of opaque, which is a nuisance. But there we are. And this, but I think you can see, this is growing in a 1/3 mixture of fairly fine bark, perlite, and sphagnum moss to retain the moisture. And then I put it inside this outer pot to stop algae growing all over the sides of the pot, which would prevent me seeing what's going on. This is a new leaf that I've grown. These are some old leaves that it came with last year, and these will gradually die off. Normally, Restrepias produce one or sometimes two flowers from the centre of the leaf, and they can go on flowering for many years. This one, on this occasion, has produced 3 flowers, and they are just absolutely exquisite. I'll show you a close-up in a minute. But I really love Restrepias, and if you've got cool, moist conditions, they're not normally very expensive to buy, although this one was more expensive than usual, I think because it's much rarer in cultivation. Amongst my different Restrepias, there's a whole range of sizes of flowers. So, for example, this is Restrepia cuprea, and you can see the difference in the flower size. This is more typical of many Restrepias. This one, you see, I've got growing in a clay pot. Why do I grow them in clay pots? Basically, it's just because I think they look really nice in them. I don't think they particularly grow any better, but a clear plastic pot is a good way of seeing what's going on inside the pot if you're not too sure whether you're keeping plants moist enough or whether the roots have developed properly. So I do strongly advise clear plastic pots if you're not too sure whether an orchid's going to do well or not. You can keep an eye on things much more easily. And then I'll just put this one down. And then there's this one, which is Restrepia seketti. Now I've had this for a long time, and this is one of the smaller growing sorts, so it's much more compact in its habit. They do vary a lot. In the video that I shot last month, I showed you Restrepia jesupiana, which has beautiful yellow flowers. Well, that's finished now, so I can't recap on that. But they are really lovely plants. Over here, they get quite a lot of light. As I said before, they're kept moist. They don't get direct sun. In the summer, they can take a fair amount of light, and you can often tell because the leaves should be, in most cases, a fairly dark green, and sometimes they even take on a sort of reddish tone in the summer when they're getting a bit more light. But if the leaves don't stay really plump, then you know you're doing something wrong. One thing worth mentioning is that slugs really love them, so you have to keep a really close watch on slugs. I can't smell anything. A few of them have a strange, not altogether pleasant smell. I think it's because they're fertilised by flies. So they don't smell of sort of smelly meat, they just have a really weird, not too pleasant smell, but it doesn't travel very far, so unless you actually take the trouble to sniff them, it's not really bothersome. The other miniature I wanted to cover today is a miniature Dendrochilum. Now, don't ask me why, but Dendrochilums are now classified as Coelogynes. Now, a Coelogyne is an orchid that looks a lot more like this. This is Coelogyne cristata, which I'll come on to quickly in a minute. It's a bit of a nuisance that they've been reclassified, and I'm still, for the time being, going to call them Dendrochilums, the common name being chain orchid, because they are characterised by having a very long flowering spike with lots of tiny flowers, in some cases really tiny. This one is rather lovely in that it's quite, it's a miniature. This is Dendrochilum auriculare, and as you can see, the flower spikes come out of the centre of the new leaves, which in this case are rather an attractive bronze colour. They have like many Dendrochilums, a sort of strange, not pleasant, not unpleasant smell. Quite interesting. My favourite Dendrochilum, but I'm showing you this one because, as you can see, here's a good example of a much clearer plastic pot. You can see exactly what's going on and how well the roots have developed. And again, I got it in a black outer pot. My most favourite Dendrochilum, which I've shown you before, and I put a link on screen. This is one of my treasured Dendrochilum glumaceums, which has, I think, a really heavenly, spicy, sweet scent. Flowers very, very reliably every year. What are we, late winter now? And it fills the greenhouse with its scent. And it's a really beautiful scent, quite a subtle scent, quite unlike many other orchids. But as you see, the difference in the size of the two is quite striking. And this is a lot more typical of many Dendrochilums. They are mostly medium and in some cases quite large growing. But there are quite a few of the miniature growing Dendrochilums. So if you haven't got room for one of these, the miniature Dendrochilums are really quite worth having. Now, whilst we're looking at Dendrochilums, I'm just going to show you this because this is really a bit of a failure and a warning to me. This is another form of Dendrochilum glumaceum, which I just showed you, and this just has one flower spike this year. Most years it is actually absolutely covered. The reason is quite simple. This greenhouse has gradually become fuller and fuller with plants as I've acquired more plants, and the plants I have grown larger, and in some cases I've divided them. So what has happened is that the light levels have gone down and down, especially at the lower levels of the greenhouse. And I put up a shelf over here where some of the plants that tolerate quite low levels of light will grow. And this one was on that shelf last year. So this has obviously gone below the threshold at which it's prepared to flower reliably every year. And this coming year, I'm going to have to suspend it higher up where the other one was in the summer so that I don't forfeit the flowers. It's growing well, it's got plenty of nice new growths, but only one of them has a flower spike, which is very disappointing. And I'm obviously going to have to learn a lesson from that. Now, whilst we're here, this is sort of a recap really. I looked at this Coelogyne last year in detail, Coelogyne cristata. It's a very old, very well-known, very widely available orchid that is cool growing. It flowers reliably every year, apart from the fact that it has these really, and I mean really beautiful, pristine white flowers that hang down very gracefully. It also has the most delightful sweet scent. Coelogyne cristata covers quite a big range in the natural habitat, and there are a lot of slight variations of it. I have one over here which is about 2 or 3 weeks later than this one and has flowers that are pure white and aren't scented. So the reason I mention scent is that if you possibly can, smell before you buy or acquire a Coelogyne cristata, because I have smelt others that haven't really had much of a scent at all. The other thing worth pointing out is that you can see, possibly just here, some of the oldest pseudobulbs are much more squat than mine, and that's because they were grown in a much higher light level. In this greenhouse, where, as I said a few minutes ago, I'm having trouble really maintaining light levels, it's tending to grow much longer pseudobulbs and with greater distances between the pseudobulbs. So what I'm going to do is, when this is finished flowering and before it starts its new growth, I'm going to bring these round in a sort of spiral. Otherwise they will just grow outside the pot and get wider and wider. And then, of course, the plants below become much more shaded. Some people suggest that Coelogyne cristata gets a cool, dry winter rest. Well, of course, in the native habitat they have a cool, dry winter, but they have mists and fog, and that keeps the pseudobulbs quite plump. And there was one very well-known grower who specialised in Coelogynes amongst other orchids in this country, and he used to grow most of his Coelogynes and Dendrochilums growing in trays, actually sitting in sort of shallow trays of water most of the time. And that maintains the bulbs really quite plump, and I prefer to do that. I have seen Coelogyne cristatas in flower in the spring with really shriveled pseudobulbs. It is not necessary, in my experience and other people's experience, to sort of starve them of water and dehydrate them over the winter. I think they're much better off having a sort of plentiful supply of moisture and humidity all through the winter, so that when they're in flower they produce this marvellous good-looking effect. Really wonderful scent, marvellous orchid. And then just 2 more recaps from the video that I shot last month. This is my Coelogyne speciosa, which I said was the most typical form. It has these beautiful sort of salmony flowers with markings on the lip. And as you see it, when I filmed it last time, it had lots of flowers coming. So this has now got 1, 2, 3, 4 flowers out on flowering stems that produce, in most cases, eventually 3 flowers. This one has produced 1, this one is out now, and then there's another bud coming here. So a really fantastic, again, very widely available, very well known Coelogyne, but fantastically worth having. And then just to finish off, this is my miniature Phalaenopsis, Phalaenopsis thailandica, which I filmed last month. But I thought I'd show you it because it has now, all the flower spikes have opened, a few of the earliest flowers have dropped off, but it is now looking its peak best. So it's been in flower now for over a month with these delicate, tiny little, exquisite little flowers that just sort of quiver with the slightest movement. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed this video, and keep watching more videos to come.